Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things, indeed the last of the year. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is Simone Segouin, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. My French is not amazing, but I have tried to make sure that I've got that as close as possible. She was also known as Nicole Minet, her code name, as she fought with the French resistance. Now the miniature itself comes from Bad Squiddo games, and there is a much better write-up about her exploits during the Second World War, the defense of Paris, or rather the retaking of Paris. Very interesting young lady, and she actually only passed away fairly recently in 2023 and had been a pediatric nurse for the rest of her life, which is kind of awesome. All the same, the miniature today, one or two things went wrong while I was painting her. I'll be honest about that up front. I wanted to do something quite unusual to cap off the year, so the French resistance, why not? That seemed like an interesting one. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled. I will pop in the on the video where things have gone wrong, so you can see how I've kind of come back from one or two of those little blurps. All the same, all the paints for this one will be listed in the description below, the same as always, and I'll make sure there's a link to where you can find out more about this particular miniature and the very real woman who she represents. So, let's get started. Now, I've just now realized that I hadn't actually hit record on any of that. So, because it is -6 degrees outside at the moment, what I have is the brush on primer from the Army Painter. And as you see, scraggly old brush helps me really work it into the recesses, make sure I'm not missing anywhere. And yeah, just a tiny wee bit of water in this will help it apply. Same as if you're popping on an ordinary acrylic paint. You don't have to go crazy with this. Just make sure that there is a little bit of it on all of the metal so that the paint you're going to apply over the top has something to key onto. You can do this with pretty much any spray primer that you find, so the ones that are designed to go through an airbrush. Now this will work as well, but this is the one I've got. I know how it works, and I like it. So this is what I'm using. And then we can carry on painting her exactly the same as we would any other miniature. What I'm going to start with, as most things, is going to be her skin. So I have some Cadian flesh tone here. I want her to be relatively pale, but still with a bit of colour to her. So you'll see this will require a couple of thin coats. Now while I've got that Cadian flesh tone out, what I'm going to do is grab a little bit of Brainmatter Beige, and this is going to start the base coat for the eyes. So what I can do here is to take my paint and honestly be fairly messy with it. I just want to fill in the eye socket. And actually, while I've got it out, I'm going to use this to fill in her shirt and the bobby socks she's wearing. Now, after 2 coats of the Brainmatter Beige over the shirt, it was a little bit chalky in some places. So what I did was to come back and give it a third, admittedly, but thin that down to about half and half paint and water. And it's actually come down and smoothed it out quite nicely. It does look on camera a little bit rougher than it is in reality, but I'm not too worried. I know what I'm looking at. What I'm going to turn to now is matte black. And I'm going to get myself a slightly thinner brush for this, and this is watered down quite a bit. What I want to do here is lay in her pupils. And this is a bit of a tricky bit with the camera in the way, so I might do some of this off camera. Yeah, she's looking a little bit clown school at the moment, but that's what we're doing this stage now for. Because now I'm going to go back to that Cadian flesh tone, and this is where I'm going to start tidying up the shape of the eyes and making that look a little bit more reasonable. Now this is definitely way easier without the camera in the way, so I am going to take her away for a second here. Now at the moment, she's still going to look a little bit staring, quite intense, but we have got shading and some highlights to get through, so don't worry about that just yet. What I'm going to turn to is Night Sky. This is a nice desaturated blue-grey from the Army Painter. It is a wonderful denim colour. Covers beautifully, especially over grey. So a quick blast of this on her skirt. Now for the belt or sash that she's wearing, I'm going to start with Dragon Red. Now there is actually a contemporary film either on the day or shortly after where she was involved in the arrest of 25 German soldiers. And in that she is very clearly wearing, red, white and blue. She is wearing the tricolour. So I figure might as well stick to that for the miniature. Now with Bootstrap Brown, I'm going to base coat her hair. This is quite an important step because it's also the point at which part of her eye is going to disappear, and that will start to look a lot more reasonable. And then with Tundra Taupe, I'm going to base coat the side cap she's wearing. This colour, wonderfully enough, is actually a really good one for a base coat for French uniforms, if you're looking for something in that sort of vein. Now, there isn't actually all that much on the miniature to paint. What I'm going to go for here, this is Oak Brown, and this is one of my favourites for like a really dark, warm leather. I'm going to be fairly careful as I come near the shirt and what have you that I have already painted, because I don't want to have to come back and tidy up. Endless iterations on that white. But of interest here, she is actually wearing a wristwatch, which I should probably have base coated while I had my black out. But she's got the wristwatch, and then she has the strap wrapped around her hand. So don't make the mistake I almost did and try and buff that watch off, because I was very close to getting in there with my knife and file and removing it entirely. Whoops. Luckily I didn't. Now you could go up to Tree Ancient or even Fur Brown. There's not a correct color for brown shoes, but while I've got this out, I'm going to paint them in the same color. Now there's not much in the way of gold or brass details on her, but I have here Retributor armor. I'm going to use this for the buttons, and I'm also going to paint the watch face on her wrist with this. Now finally for the base coats, we're going to tackle the MP40. Now here what I have, this is German Grey from Vallejo. Strap Grey from the Army Painter or Ironclad Grey are both quite close. Corvus Black would be another one. Any dark grey. There's just a tiny touch of blue in this. And I like it over a pure black, because when we shade this, there is still a little bit of actual, something happens in the recesses rather than just trying to shade a flat black. But whatever you like the look of. Once I'm done with this, what I'm going to do is cruise around and just tidy up any of the little bits and pieces that I might have hit or splurged while I was applying base coats. And then she should, with a bit of luck, be ready for a shade. Now once you've finished with your base coats, it's time to go ahead and shade her. Now if you've come across Marine Juice on the channel before, that will work perfectly well, and I'll pop a link down in the bottom so you can have a look at how that goes together. But what I've mixed here today in my little palette, this is 1 part dark tone, 1 part strong skin shade, and then 2 parts Speedpaint Medium. So 1 drop each of the good stuff and then 2 drops of the Speedpaint Medium, because I want this to be relatively thin. I also want it to be not quite black. I do want it to be dark, but I don't want it to be black. And a little bit of warmth from the skin shade is going to do wonders. So I'm going to apply this over the entire miniature. In areas like this where it collects quite heavily to begin with, I'll shift it away with my brush. I might have to come back and shift it again because it's just going to naturally collect there. But over her face, her hair, everything. This would probably be easier if I use a slightly smaller brush. I don't want it to be massively grimy, but we'll see what this looks like as it dries. Now once it has dried, I have to admit, I probably made a mistake there. I don't think, in hindsight, that I actually need the dark tone in that mix. When I'm painting soldiers and what have you, this slightly starker finish works quite well, but I think on this particular figure, on like a resistance figure who's wearing civilian gear, yeah, maybe I could have skipped the dark tone and just thinned down the skin shade. Would have looked better. what I'm going to do, it's not a big ask to come back with the base coats again, and I'm going to basically cover over most of those areas again, but I will leave a little bit of the shaded stuff in the recesses. It'll give us quite a bit of depth, but while it will take a little bit of work, I think it's going to look much better than just leaving it. So yeah, back over pretty much everything, but leaving just a little bit of the shaded stuff, particularly towards edges. That'll look pretty cool, I think. Okay, so that's annoying, but it's not the end of the world, and we have ended up with a fair bit more depth than I would have done by just leaving it as it was. So, swings and roundabouts. Happy little accidents. What I have now is Thunderous Blue, and I've thinned this down a little bit more than I normally would because I want it to highlight the blue, but I want it to settle and then dry fairly subtly. I don't want this to be a super sharp transition of color. So what I'm going to do is use it to add a bit more shape to the skirt. Now, same thing again, but this time with wolf grey. And I'm going to concentrate more towards edges and high points of the skirt. So I might even want to thin that down a little bit more, actually. Now to highlight her hat, what I've got is a little of that Tundra Taupe from earlier, and I've mixed in roughly half and half ancient stone to that. Now this gives you a nice faded finish to whatever you mix it into. It's an ivory sort of colour, and it works beautifully for most sort of World War II era fabrics as well. Now adding progressively more ancient stone will let you basically control the fade. So I've done a couple of extra highlights there, and now with just a little bit of neat ancient stone, I will dot the very finished creases of the cap. Now you can use an ivory or similar to highlight pretty much anything. But when it comes to the red, I'm actually going to turn to a lighter red paint. I have here Angelic Red. And let's go ahead and add a little bit more shape to, ooh, that's bright, to the sash she's wearing. Now to start some work on her skin, I'm going to begin with Barbarian Flesh. And I want to cover a fair amount of her skin with this. Same principle as before though, leave a little bit of the shaded stuff in the recesses. This has got just a bit more warmth than our flat Cadian flesh tone will have. Now at the moment she is still super pale, and I'm going to stick to that for now because I'm really building shape rather than color here. What I have is ruby skin, and I've watered this down quite a bit. What I want to do with it is now to start kind of guiding some of the shape of her skin. So her legs, just a little bit of extra of this on her calves. And to give her a bit more warmth, I've thinned down here, this is half and half Reichland Flesh Shade with Lamian Medium, because at the moment she's a bit more pale than I would like, but Reichland Flesh Shade straight from the pot is going to be unreasonably heavy. So thin it down, apply a little bit of this over all of the skin. There we go, a little bit more life. Now I've got some Dorado skin. This is very, very light, so thin it down quite a bit. And we'll just pop in tip of her nose. Twirl my brush a little bit here to make sure I've got a point. That cheekbone there, brows, and I'll do the back of her knuckles with this as well. And to finish off her face, give it a little bit more life, what I've done is mixed up some Carroburg Crimson and Lamian Medium. Same 1-to-1 mix. And I'm going to very carefully just blob a little bit of this onto her bottom lip. Now you can, of course, just pick a reddish color and paint it over the top, but I tend to find that using a thin down wash over a skin tone, even for lipstick or just a bottom lip, looks a little bit more realistic. Now, with a little bit of Paratrooper Tan and a gnarly old brush, what I'm going to do is just lightly dry brush her hair. You could spend time individually highlighting curls and what have you, but you don't really have to. Just a wee blast of this will do the job. polish off her blouse, what I have is some matte white. And this time, this is thinned quite a bit, because same as the other highlights that I've done, I don't want this to be particularly stark. It is going to stand out a little bit more, as I say, in person versus on camera, but it will be plenty. I know what I've got in front of me. Now I realize I've just skipped through a bit. I used a little bit of fur brown along the edge of the leather to help finish that off, but that was it. What I've got now is matte varnish. This is Varnish Plus from Instar. Ordinarily I would just take her outside and hit her with a spray varnish, but it's literally still snowing, so I'm not going to take my chances. I'm going to brush this on. So all over everything. Now once the varnish has dried, it does bring everything together in quite a pleasant way. I tend to find that it dulls some of the colors a little and makes some of the highlights a little bit sharper. Always worth varnishing your miniatures. It's not just about the protection. But the reason why I've done that as well is to introduce a surface over the top of the paint, which I'm now going to get a little bit of 2B pencil and lightly buff along the MP40 with it. Because using this, I get a nice sharp graphite edge to the gunmetal, and I don't have to do any painting for it. Now once I'm done with this, what I'm going to do is to go ahead and pop a base on her. And the recipe for that will be in the description. Goodness me, I tell you what, I cannot keep anything in shot today. My hand is just all over the show. But at any rate, once she is finished, let's get a look at what she looks like. And so there at last, our little resistance fighter is complete. And yeah, there were one or two things where I know that went awry. That was not how I planned to paint her. But yeah, for those of you who enjoy watching me come back from a mistake, plenty there this time around. So as always, thanks goes out to Exit23 Games for light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, I'm not going to paint any more toy soldiers until next year, which is a joke that will one day get old. And anyhow, folks, thank you very much for your time. You all enjoy the rest of your year.